Okay, thanks. We have been talking for a number of months about the situation about allegations of abuse for what we call vulnerable populations in the state. We made an announcement the other day that we want to talk about today because this is going to be a major undertaking for the entire administration. But I was thinking about it when I was getting ready for that presentation. You know, we all have our own horror stories of what we inherited when we walked in the door. And the evidence of what I believe is about 15 years of deterioration in government and apathy and atrophy in government. And in every one of your agencies, I'm sure we've shared many of them. You all have stories of what you discovered when you walked in the door and the evidence of the decline. Some of them are funny. Some of them are truly tragic and probably nowhere more than in the field of human services. Because when government fails in human services, it's failing in its responsibility to protect vulnerable populations. And there is no doubt that there has been government failures. It's a very large area of responsibility for the state. It's large in terms of number of people we serve, number of employees involved, number of agencies involved. So it was quite a problem to tackle. It's also an extraordinarily complex and difficult area. It's hard to provide proper care to vulnerable persons, and there are a number of a myriad of needs within. So there were many challenges. We did it right. We took the requisite amount of time. Sometimes people say that we try to get everything done at once. This was complex. We took time, which means several weeks, right? Not that we take a lot of time to do anything here. We haven't been here for that long a time. But this was done right. You're going to hear the issue outlined today. We're going to start with Clarence, who's going to talk about what he found. Clarence Sundrum is truly one of the national experts in this area, and he's done extraordinary work here once again. You'll hear about our proposals for a better enforcement mechanism. Courtney will talk about prevention. I believe one is the other. Prevention is also a form of enforcement. Enforcement is also a measure towards prevention. And then we'll talk about how we're going to make it a reality, because it's a pressing problem. It's a tragic problem. We have a smart approach. I also want to get it done. And if we have one hallmark as an administration, we get it done. This is going to be difficult to get done. There's only a relatively short period of time left in the session, but it is truly a piece of legislation that I want to get acted on before we leave, one way or the other. I want the people of this state to know what the challenge is, what the situation is, what we propose doing, and I want them to know how it turned out. Because you're talking about hundreds of thousands of people's lives and well-being here. And you're talking about basic issues of human dignity and safety. So with that, let's turn it over to Clarence.
Thank you, Governor. So let me start by just stating the overarching goal, which is to prevent the abuse of vulnerable people by creating a consistent set of safeguards that are implemented consistently across government. Performing that function requires aggressively investigating instances of reports of abuse and neglect, but as importantly, it requires supporting our frontline staff. I just need to emphasize that we have placed enormous responsibility on the workers at the front lines of these service systems to safeguard vulnerable people in a variety of different settings. And one of the things they want of us, aside from a pay raise, is fair treatment. And so one of the goals of this legislation is to treat those frontline workers fairly. There are over 1 million New Yorkers who are in one type of a program or another that is either directly run by the state or that is authorized, licensed, certified, or funded by the state. And there are a variety of different programs. We have 273,000 residential beds in 6 different human service systems, and several 100,000 additional people who are served in non-residential programs. And these programs serve different types of populations. We have older adults, we have people with disabilities like mental illness, developmental disabilities, substance abuse disorders. We have children who are in residential facilities of different kinds, juvenile justice facilities, special education, residential schools. So it's an enormously complicated system. And for the million people or so that we talk about being served by these systems, they also all have families. So the number of people who are affected by how government performs this basic function is significantly larger. So among the problems that we currently have in the system is the well-documented problem of abuse of vulnerable people in care. And abuse embraces not just the overt acts of abuse, but the failure of employees to perform necessary functions that places people at risk of harm. We've had problems with lack of trained and competent investigators to respond when allegations of abuse and neglect have been made. Our systems for holding employees accountable, particularly in the state system, have not worked well. We have not been successful with imposing effective discipline on those employees. Providers are not given consistent guidance about what it is we expect of them, and I'll come to that point in a minute. We have neglected the responsibility to train the frontline staff, in whom we repose so much responsibility for the safety of vulnerable people. And we've had a dizzying array of laws and standards that govern these areas of abuse and neglect. What this graphic essentially tells you is that the 6 different human services agencies that authorize or operate programs for people with special needs have varying standards on everything from what constitutes abuse to who it should be reported to and when, who should investigate and how they should respond to these allegations, when should law enforcement be involved in responding to the allegation, what is the standard of proof by which the allegation is substantiated or not substantiated, and what are the consequences. If we had a single consistent standard across the state and across these human service systems, you would see a chart that's all green, but obviously it is not. And our goal really is to transform this multicolored chart to a single uniform approach to dealing with abuse and neglect in our systems. So the legislation that the governor puts forward does a number of very important things. First, it sets a standard definition of abuse and neglect and creates a single consistent process for responding to reports of abuse and neglect when they are made, for investigating them, and for resolving the allegations. Second, it creates the Justice Center, which is going to be the focal point of the state's efforts to reform this area of government. Third, it implements proportional and progressive discipline. And that essentially means separating out the people who commit serious acts of abuse that ought to be criminally prosecuted. They ought to be terminated from employment. They ought to be barred from ever working in any capacity where they have contact with vulnerable persons. Progressive discipline applies to people who commit lesser offenses, mistakes that occur in the workplace, errors that occur because of conditions that are caused or contributed to by conditions in the workplace. The law also strengthens criminal penalties for the crimes of endangering vulnerable persons. It increases some penalties. It creates new crimes that would be easier to prosecute because we are dealing with people who have vulnerabilities and sometimes aren't the best of witnesses. It does an important function of consolidating background check functions. Like many other things in the state government, we have an array of different standards by which background checks are done on prospective employees. Sometimes the same employee may have to have multiple background checks because the agency has programs that are certified by different agencies of state government, and the standards by which those background checks are done differently. So we want to have a more consistent process. And finally, transparency. Transparency is absolutely essential if the government is ever going to restore trust in how we carry out this important function. So the bill that the governor proposes has standard definitions of abuse and neglect. And one of the important features of this definition is that it treats the failures to report abuse and neglect and supervisory failures to act upon reports when they receive them as a very serious matter. These are firing offenses in the table of penalties that are proposed in this law. It creates a Justice Center, which is the centerpiece of this legislation, and provides a single-minded focus on protecting vulnerable persons. There are 5 critical functions that the Justice Center has. The first is a hotline to make an easy process for reporting suspected allegations of abuse or neglect. There's going to be a toll-free hotline manned 24 hours a day. Anyone can call in. There are mandated reporters who work in this field, but it will also take anonymous reports. So if they're staff, if there are residents who are afraid of reprisals, they can always make an anonymous call. It will have trained staff who will be there to identify and refer potential crimes to law enforcement agencies for investigation and a potential prosecution. It will have a special prosecutor who has the authority to prosecute crimes of abuse and neglect against vulnerable persons. And this authority will run concurrently with district attorneys in the local counties. And this prosecution capacity, by the way, will also strengthen the state's disciplinary activities by having lawyers present the case for termination of state employees in the arbitration process. At present, we often send labor relations people who wind up being outmatched in an administrative hearing. The third function is to create a registry, and this registry would be across all human service systems. Some of you may have heard of registries that currently exist. There's a registry in the health department for nurses' aides. Those are good initiatives, but they're limited initiatives. Somebody who's placed on the health department's nurse registry can walk across the street and go work at an OPWDD facility. There's no bar on doing that. We're going to have a comprehensive registry that cuts across all of our human service agencies, and people who are placed in it for serious or repeated offenses against vulnerable people will be banned from working in any capacity which requires contact with vulnerable people. The fifth thing is monitoring and oversight. The responsibilities that are currently assigned to the Commission on Quality of Care are going to be transferred to the Justice Center, and they're going to be extended to other agencies beyond the mental hygiene system that currently lack any kind of independent oversight. One very important feature of this monitoring capacity is going to be the ability to look at the data that's been collected in the hotline and the register, to look at patterns of reporting, to identify trends, to look at what is not being reported, and to identify those facilities for further monitoring and investigation. And finally, there are training functions. The Justice Center is going to have the responsibility of developing a code of conduct consistent with principles that are established by law. And this code of conduct would apply to all workers in human service agencies that they would be required to sign. It will also perform an important function of setting standards for investigation of allegations of abuse or neglect and standards by which reports of these investigations are done. It will certify investigators as being competent to investigate abuse and neglect. So it's not going to be a situation where anybody who happens to be free at a provider site is given the responsibility for conducting an investigation. I mentioned earlier proportional discipline. It distinguishes between serious transgressions that occur in the workplace. We have many thousands of people working in these human service systems, and the vast majority of them do a tremendous job in carrying out functions that our whole society depends upon, whether they are disabled, whether they're elderly. And most of them come to work every day, do a tremendously hard job for relatively small pay, and very few thanks. But in that group, there are also a small percentage of people who commit serious crimes against the vulnerable people. And we want to make sure that we focus our energies on ridding the workplace of these people and banning them from ever coming back to work in these professions. And that's an important aspect of deterrence, which, as the governor said earlier, is an aspect of prevention of abuse in the first place. Progressive discipline and identification of systemic problems that expose people to harm and making sure those problems are corrected is part of this effort at progressive discipline. I mentioned earlier strengthening some laws, a statute that makes sexual activity between staff and residents of a facility a crime. Sometimes we have a problem with proving that there was a lack of consent, and this would make it very clear that there's a bright line between the staff and residents of these facilities. And we're going to strengthen some of the penalties that deal with abuse of vulnerable persons. I mentioned earlier consolidating of background check functions so that there's one-stop shopping that replaces the multiple checks that we currently have. This is going to eliminate duplicative and wasteful activity, which is also expensive because somebody has to pay for all these background checks. Transparency, it is extraordinarily important that we extend tools like the Freedom of Information Law beyond the confines of state government. As many of you know, most of the services that are provided in the state are not provided by state agencies or state providers. They are provided by private agencies with a license or a certification from the state. So the reach of the Freedom of Information Law ought to extend to those programs as well. And frankly, this is the future. As our major programs comply with laws like the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Supreme Court decision in Olmstead, more and more people are going to be living outside state-run institutions and facilities. So the importance of having transparency extend to our contractors is critically important. There are two other aspects of transparency. The governor's bill requires every provider agency to have an incident review process. And that incident review process, which is typically done by the staff of an agency, is going to be opened up so that incident review committees will be required to have representation from families, from consumers, and from outside advocates. So there is a bit of sunshine that goes into the process by which these investigations and corrective actions are reviewed. The agencies that are affected by this legislation are 6 of our largest state agencies, OPWDD, OMH, the Department of Health, which runs its adult homes and assisted living facilities, the Office of Children and Families, the Office of Alcohol and Substance Abuse Services, and the State Education Department, which is responsible for residential schools and some of the out-of-state placements that we've made. This legislation will cover all of these human service agencies. But as you're all aware, OPWDD has been the agency that has most recently been in the spotlight as we've looked at the issues of abuse and neglect. And Commissioner Courtney Burke has been busy implementing a series of aggressive reforms to address the issues that she identified since she came in. So let me turn over to Commissioner Burke.
Thank you, Clarence. And on behalf of all of the commissioners that are affected by this legislation, I'd like to thank the governor for his attention to this issue and for making this a priority for the millions of people that will ultimately be affected by the legislation. We all know that this legislation will be critical to the reforms that we've been implementing, making them stronger, but we also know that the best way to root out abuse and neglect is to stop it before it starts, to look at prevention. We will always need to investigate and address bad actors in the system, but at OPWDD, the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities, and other service agencies here today, we are changing the culture and reforming how we serve people with developmental disabilities and those with special needs. The different ways that we are doing this include we are looking at how we hire, train, and discipline employees, the way we manage the system overall and hold providers accountable, and the way that we serve individuals and their families. We have already implemented significant reforms at OPWDD. We have raised hiring standards for all direct care workers so that they now must have a high school diploma and pass psychological and drug testing. We have implemented consistent standards and competencies for direct support professionals, and we will be doing so for their supervisors later this year, as well as training to reinforce certain principles. We're also looking at empowering and improving communications with individuals and families to hear their ideas on how we can better reform the system. We've restructured our own agency operations to reflect these reforms and to make them stronger, and we've improved responsiveness to individuals and families. Some of the results that we've already seen as a result of our efforts: one of the things we did earlier this year was start a recruitment campaign to increase the pool of candidates that we are hiring from to improve the quality of the workforce. As a result of our recruitment efforts, monthly visits to our online careers page have doubled from 3,500 to 7,000. We also recently received a federal grant of over $2 million to create programs that support individuals to be in more integrated settings so that they can have opportunities for employment. We are now currently seeking the termination of close to 200 employees with substantiated allegations of abuse to show that we do not tolerate abuse in the workplace. Some of our other reforms: we are piloting a program that uses video cameras in agency vehicles to keep individuals and employees safe. We're increasing transparency. One of the ways that we're doing this is by showing individuals and families good providers and bad providers and making that information public on our website. We have also begun a provider report card that compares agencies and how they're doing with the services that they're providing. Other results: we had heard from individuals and families and employees that overtime was a problem. It led to potential situations in the workplace that could lead to abuse. So we've been focusing on this issue quite seriously for the past several months. As a result of our efforts to reduce overtime, we've seen that the number of staff working greater than 7 consecutive days has decreased by 25% in the last 6 months, and the number of staff working greater than 16 consecutive hours has decreased by 43%. The governor's proposed legislation is very important for all of this. It dramatically expands these efforts to stop abuse before it starts. It consolidates background check functions among the agencies that are affected. It builds a new database to track all abuse and neglect reports in order to analyze patterns and look at prevention. As Clarence mentioned, it establishes a clear code of conduct for all employees to prevent abuse to begin with. And it builds accountability for providers for their performance in complying with corrective responsibilities. At this point, I would like to turn it over to Larry Schwartz, who has been key to organizing all these reforms and making it a priority for the administration.
Thank you very much, Courtney. You've heard now about what's in the bill and what we have already accomplished in the area of helping people with disabilities and special needs. And now I want to talk a few minutes about how we're going to get this very important piece of legislation that the governor has introduced done. This is going to be a 6 to 7 week campaign. And I say it's a 6 to 7 week campaign because we are going to get the governor's legislation passed this legislative session, not next legislative session, this legislative session. I would say, Governor, with your leadership and your commitment to justice throughout your career, and especially with this issue, this administration is committed to getting this legislation done in this legislative session, working with the Senate and the Assembly. And the way we're going to do this is through not only a statewide grassroots effort, but we're going to put together a campaign of one voice. That voice is going to be very loud. That voice is going to be very persuasive. That voice is going to be very effective because we're going to make sure that all New Yorkers know that they have to speak up so the voices of people with disability and the voices of people with special needs are heard. And our legislators here in Albany hear those voices and they act. Because one of the things we found out and why we've been so successful with so many of the initiatives that we've gotten passed, that when we engage New Yorkers, when we get our citizens in this state involved, politicians act. And that's what this campaign will be all about. We've done it with 2 budgets. We've done it with pension reform. We've done it with all crimes DNA. We've done it with the tax cap, with ethics reform. We've had hundreds, if not thousands, of meetings with all these campaigns throughout the state. We've met and we've engaged thousands of New Yorkers. And because of those efforts in getting New Yorkers involved, those initiatives have passed and we've been successful. And this is going to be no different. We need to educate New Yorkers So they get involved, so they speak up for those who can't speak up, so their voices are heard. One of the things we're here to announce today is the creation of a coalition. It's the Coalition for the Protection of People with Special Needs. We've already gotten nearly 80 different advocacy groups across the state. There'll be more every single day added to this list. They represent the mental health community, the substance abuse community, the developmental disability community, as well as the special education community. And working with this coalition, we are going to engage not only the self-advocates and parents and family members and providers to lobby and reach out to the legislature, but we're going to go out there and working with them, reaching out to all New Yorkers to educate them on the importance of the governor's legislation and how it will go out there and, create a justice in terms of the health, safety, and welfare of these people that has been long overdue. In addition, you'll see here a list of the various advocacy groups that already have joined on to the coalition. And we also have launched a new website, which all New Yorkers will be able to log on to as a way to participate in the grassroots effort. That website is justiceforspecialneeds.com. And there'll be an email campaign, there'll be calls into legislators, people will be able to submit video testimonials, so it's going to be a complete interactive effort. We'll be able to track and monitor who is signed on, what they've done, how they've engaged their local legislator or legislators to get them on board so that this legislature gets passed, again, in this legislative session. These are the things, again, that New Yorkers can do. Email their legislator, send emails to friends and families to encourage them to call their local legislators. There'll be a way for them to stay in touch with our office, again, things like submitting a video testimonial. The other thing, of course, we're going to ask you as a cabinet that you've done so often and so effectively for the governor is ask you to go on the road as well, crisscrossing the state as you've done so many times, engaging New Yorkers, educating them on how important this piece of legislation is, how profound it is. I'm personally excited. This is why we get involved in public service. There is no more noble cause than something like getting the governor's piece of legislation passed, and that's why we all need to go out there 24/7, getting out there, crisscrossing the state, making time in our schedule to educate and inform New Yorkers that they need to get engaged in this issue and help us get it done. And again, everyone needs to go visit, log on, get involved on justiceforspecialneeds.com. And I'll pass it on to the governor. Thank you.
Well said. Larry buried the ask at the end there. The way we're going to get the legislation passed is the way we get all the legislation passed. We're going to go to the people and explain it to the people and build popular support, and that will then percolate up to Albany, right? It's worked for us every time we had to get a piece of legislation passed. Politicians go second, the people go first. There is a relatively short period of time that is left in the legislative session, and we have a number of items that we're trying to get done. We're trying to get a teacher evaluation bill passed. We're trying to get something on NYRA possibly done, a NYRA reform package done, although that's somewhat preliminary. We're trying to negotiate a prescription drug abuse bill. It's a big issue, especially on Long Island. We're trying to get a cyberbullying bill done. But of all the things we have to get done, or would like to get done, let me say it that way, this is the most important, and this is the most critical. This is 1 million people. 1 million people. I was talking to a legislator this morning. I said, well, maybe we'll do it next year. It's only 1 year. 1 year, it's not only 1 year. 1 year is a long period of time. especially if you're in a situation where you're being abused. 1 year is a long period of time. 1 year is a long period of time, especially after so many years of inattention and decline. Legislator said, well, the devil is in the details. That's old Albany. The devil is in the details. You know, that brought us to a place where everyone supported the goal, but nothing ever happened, right? I agree with the goal. I agree we have to do something, but the devil is in the details. But, you know, we have to work out. The devil isn't in the details on this. The devil is in the abuse in this. The devil is in the delay in this. It's not about the details. You'll hear, when you go to an ed board or when you do a community briefing on this, two main theories of opposition. One will be, well, you have district attorneys can do this. DAs have criminal jurisdiction. Why do you need another government bureaucracy? A DA can do this. If the DAs could do this, we wouldn't be here, right? If the DAs were doing these cases, we wouldn't be in the situation in the first place. The DAs will say, these are incredibly difficult and specialized cases to make, which they are. I mean, just imagine the fact pattern, you know. Population making the allegation, population that's witnesses. So if the DAs were making the cases, we wouldn't be here. Historically, there have been legislative initiatives like this. At one time, we set up a special prosecutor for Medicaid fraud that has concurrent jurisdiction with the DAs, just like this will be concurrent jurisdiction with the DAs, which means if a DA wants to bring the case, God bless them, they can bring the case. But if the DA doesn't bring the case, there's an alternative. The Medicaid fraud and special prosecutor, why? Because Medicaid fraud was a discrete area, and you needed specialized expertise, and the DAs had other cases they were doing. The analogy fits here perfectly, in my opinion. Also, most DAs support this. We had DAs at the press conference. I spoke to DA Joe Hines, Bill Fitzpatrick from Onondaga, Cy Vance. Most DAs support it. Kathleen Rice, Nassau supports it. Janet DeFiore, Westchester supports it. So most DAs support it. It doesn't take anything away from the DAs. They can still bring the cases. It's still concurrent jurisdiction. This is only if they don't bring the cases, and this is a specialized area of expertise and cases that really a specialized unit would be better off making. Second school of argument will be from the unions that say, you're targeting our employees. And this is a pattern of targeting our employees, Tier 6. The 99.9% of the employees in this field do extraordinary work. This is for the exception, not the rule. And no one is targeting anyone. This is about doing justice. But if an employee is abusing a patient, then yes, we want to step in. Courtney mentioned 200 terminations. Why? If you abuse a vulnerable person in state care, that will not be tolerated. Period. Period. You will be terminated. If it's criminal, you will be prosecuted. Why? Because the alternative would be bizarre. You have people in state care who need assistance, and we're going to tolerate abuse? No. Not while I'm governor, not while any of you are in this administration. Those will be the two main schools of opposition. Both are wrong on the facts. We are right on the facts. It's just a question of communication, like so many of these issues. It's just getting out there and explaining to the people the facts. People tell the politicians what they want, we get the legislation passed. We have a great ally because this is a community that is very organized. We had 700 people here on like 1 or 2 days' notice. 700 people came to be briefed on this topic. And they're in communities all across the state. They want to help, they want to organize, they want to communicate. So some people will say, well, it's a short period of time, 7 weeks. It's not that short. We've done this in shorter periods of time. And this issue, you're going to see, communicates itself. And I am thoroughly convinced, when the people of the state hear these facts, they're going to support it overwhelmingly. The people will have no tolerance for what's been going on. And we'll have the support. So we just have to get out there. Once again, any questions on this? Any comments? Nope. LG, anything?
It's a long time coming, targeting behavior, not people, and it's great legislation.
That's right. Okay, thank you very much. Larry, thank you. Clarence, thank you. Courtney, thank you very much. Any questions from the press?
Governor, do you think the community safe New York, are they going to get involved in this?
I hope, I don't know who gets involved, who doesn't get involved, Rick, but I think this is an issue that's important to all New Yorkers, period, not just groups, all New Yorkers should get involved.
Who is paying for the campaign, the calls, the rest of
The, which campaign is that, Ken?
Well, you have this website that you're setting up, it's going to be, and you said there's...
This is a state information effort. These are, commissioners will go to ed boards, they'll go to the Daily News, they'll communicate this, as well as the rest of the legislative issues are pending before the legislature.
And the calls, because you said there was going to be a calling campaign?
No, people can go to that website to get information.
Governor, is there anyone further up the chain of command at OPWDD that's going to lose their jobs? It sounds like there's a massive failure on the part of this agency to set standards and to oversee these local agencies. You're talking about 200 people that you're trying to get rid of now, but what about the people that were actually in charge?
You know, Carol, I think what Clarence's report points out more than anything is this was a systemic breakdown and a systemic failure, more than a personal failure, which in some ways makes it worse, but it's not isolated. It was systemic among the human service agencies. And basically, by the design of the system we put in place, created a lot of issues.
Governor, do you feel as though President Obama should clarify his stance on gay marriage?
I'd leave that to the president.
Did you speak to him about that issue yesterday?
I had a conversation with the president. We had a few conversations, Ken. That issue did not come up.
Governor, outside of the context of the president, you're somebody whose views and opinion evolve on same-sex marriage. How would you counsel someone who's in the middle of that evolution right now?
You know, Nick, if you're in the middle of the evolution, I don't know that you know that you're in the middle of the evolution, and I don't know that you really can help someone or talk it through with someone. I think people get facts, people become informed, people's opinions evolve, opinions change sometimes they don't. And I don't think it's for me to counsel anyone on this issue. You understand the information, you understand the facts, and you arrive at your own opinion. This can be also an intensely personal decision. It can be a governmental decision, so I'd leave it to the individual.
Governor, there's been some concerns raised about the Justice Center bill that it still boils down to the state investigating itself and it's not independent enough. How do you respond to that?
Well, you have, Glenn, everything else, right? You have the DAs, first of all. So are these state employees? Yes. But especially the Justice Center on the criminal side, you have DAs, and then you'll have an additional special prosecutor. And that's how the system works, Glenn. You know, where do you have anything besides a DA on the criminal side and the special prosecutor? And then on the administrative side, yes, the state administers its workforce.
Governor, if this was one of the horror stories that you inherited and the devil wasn't in the details, what were the forces that required the New York Times pieces to push you to this point late in the session?
Well, you have a lot of assumptions in your question. If you want to pose a question, pose a question. If you have an editorial comment or an opinion, state an opinion. Yeah, yeah, okay. Yeah, well, I mean it with all respect also, Mike, so.
It did require the New York Times.
No, it didn't.
It did not.
No, it didn't.
So nothing was, that, the New York Times articles weren't required to overcome some other obstacle?
No, I think the New York Times, as I mentioned, I thought the series was well done. And I think this series was helpful in communicating the issue to people. We've done, but do I need newspaper articles necessarily to generate government policy? No. I mean, we've done a lot of things here without newspaper articles. We've done a lot of things despite newspaper articles, right? But I think the Times series was very well done. I think it helped communicate to the public. I think there's more communication necessary. Otherwise, I could send up the bill today and it would be passed, right?
But this seems like it would be something, an issue that's particularly an emotional issue for you. And from what we know, it would be. But we're in your second year here at the end of session. I'm wondering if there was something else. Was it concerned about lawsuits or anything else that put it to this point rather than?
Well, let's do it this way, Mike. There's only 2 sessions, right, that I've been here. The first session and the second session. We are doing this in the second session. So all you can say is, well, I should have presented this last January upon walking in the door, right? So those are really the only 2 options, first, second, or second session. I am presenting it in the second session. First session, you couldn't have done this because it's one thing to know about a problem. It's another thing to fully understand the solution to a point where you can legislate it. These are complicated. We're not treating people well enough in the human services area. Yes. Thank you very much. Now, how do you resolve it? And how do you come up with an organization to do it? And do you do it internally? Do you do it externally? What do you do about the CQC? Can you get criminal authority? Are they predominantly criminal? Are they predominantly civil? Are they administrative? Let's get someone to do a thorough report. Let's see if we can get Clarence Sundrum, national expert. We have to identify him. He then needs time to do the report. He does the report. We now see the problem. Now we have to decide what the full solution is. So, sometimes these things, to do it well, takes some period of time. I don't think anyone is going to say this is an administration that's been dilatory, sits around for months and years talking about an issue, right? You couldn't be saying that because we haven't even been here years. So I think, frankly, this was an expeditious exercise overall that has come up with an intelligent, sophisticated response to a highly complex problem that existed for many, many years. And I won't ask you why journalists allowed this to go on for so many years without writing a story, but some might.
I want to make sure I understand this campaign. So you have it, you've been talking about it, and rallying, you've done with other issues, and you're going to be funneling and urging citizens to contact the legislature on behalf of this bill. Is that correct?
Which is what I always do. Property tax cap, DNA, whatever the bill is. I go out, these are the facts, people should get involved, call your politician.
Well, I'm wondering, the lobbying the way it is now, a lot of outside organizations run these kinds of grassroots campaigns. I'm wondering, is this a form of publicly financed lobbying? Can you talk about that? Are you concerned at all that you might switch over a line and create a new paradigm?
No, there are laws, and the laws specify what you can do. An elected official states their opinion, an appointed official states their opinion, and can advocate for people to support a piece of legislation. That's what we do all day long. When we go to your editorial board, I sit there and I say, I think you should support this bill. When I go give speeches, when I go do the slideshows, when you come with the presentations, I say, call your legislators, support the DNA bill, tell them to pass the budget. That's the essence of what we do here.
I understand that, but it sounds like the new facet is kind of rallying people and directing.
It's always to people. That's who we talk to, is people. always. Talking to people as opposed to talking to whom?
No, you're asking the people to act. You're asking the people
Yes,
that are no longer there.
yes, always.
And are you giving a vehicle to which they can do so? Are you?
No, they have the vehicle. No, we ask people to get involved in government and to communicate their desires to government. They figure out the means. They can write a letter, they can call, they can send an email, they can visit.
And to switch the topic, we reported this morning that Mr. Cavaliero said you spoke with Mr. Obama about bringing the Department of Defense research to the Naval College. How did he respond to that? Can you talk about his take on that?
I don't know, I didn't see what Mr. Calieros said that I said, so let me find out what Mr. Calieros said, and then, if appropriate, I'll respond.
Governor, if I could go back to gay marriage or marriage equality for a second. North Carolina became the 30th state, I think, yesterday to vote constitutional route to ban marriage equality. Do you think in the future that the federal government ought to step in and try to override the 30 states that have actually banned marriage equality?
You know, Carl, I believe in states' rights. I would like to see a place where this law is accepted all across the nation. I've advocated as such. I don't know that the solution should be the federal government telling states what to do. I think the American people will get there, and I think they are on the road to getting there. And I think it's about communication and understanding. Nick used the point that I've evolved on this. I think people, when they understand what we're talking about and they reflect on it, I think you're going to see more and more this country turning to a place where they support marriage equality.
I was just noticing that the tracks along the Hudson between New York and Albany, the state tracks, MTA, Amtrak, there's a lot of debris on the side of the tracks. Is that part of the New York work plans to clean up the tracks?
I don't know if there's specifically a cleanup. You have repair, maintenance, which I guess would include cleanup. But I don't think we have a specific cleanup, do we? Does anybody know?
Not a specific cleanup, but we do have federal funds that we received, and Amtrak received for work north of Poughkeepsie. And there's the ongoing maintenance that both CSX and Amtrak undertake to keep the track bed clean.
One more. Back to the issue of, Governor, can you give us any sort of sense of what did come up in your conversations with the President today?
He said, what do you want me to tell you? He said, John Campbell is his favorite journalist. He reads him every day. And is there any way I could introduce you guys? Most of the conversation you guys heard, right? Because most of it was at the facility. I had a few minutes with the president alone, and then it was basically a private conversation. Nothing that I would want to share or I would think would be especially relevant to you.
How did it feel to be speaking in front of the presidential seal?
I didn't notice the seal, Ken, until I saw your picture. Then from my perspective, I never saw the seal.
Feel comfortable?
It was, as podiums go, I thought it was a nice podium.
Just wondering how much of that you could do via an executive order, and just as a follow-up, how much are you willing to negotiate some of those details?
I'm sorry, Nick, it was about what? About exec comp? What was your question about?
Legislation.
On which topic?
The developmental disabilities legislation.
Oh, no, we need legislation.
You can't do any of that.
We can't do what we need to do without the legislation. And I don't want to do half a solution here. And I don't want a half-baked solution. You know, there's been too many of those over the years. So we need legislation to do this right.
And how much are you willing to negotiate?
You know, I'm willing to negotiate. The question is, Nick, you know, negotiate with what, right? That's always the question in these things. You guys have been around long enough to know that. You've been around longer than I have, most of you. and you know what is on the table, if you will, what's on the agenda for the rest of the session. So there's not a lot to negotiate with. My position is this is just the right thing to do, and sometimes it's not about a negotiation. Sometimes it's about just doing the right thing. Pass the law because it's the right thing to do. Pass the law because the people of the state want this passed. Pass the law because you're righting a wrong and you're ending an injustice. And that should be enough. That should be enough. You don't have to get practical and not everything has to be a kabuki dance and a complicated negotiation. This is the right thing to do. Pass the bill.
Governor, of the about 200 people that their OPWD is trying to fire, how long have they been trying to fire them in the office? How long has it been?
I don't know, Rick. Maybe Commissioner Burke knows?
Sure. Of the 200 or so people that we're seeking to terminate, approximately 130 of them, a little bit over that, are people who have substantiated cases of abuse and neglect. And these are people from about the past year or so where we're currently in a due process.
Governor, at any point in the past, have you had a conversation with the president about changing
About you? I don't recall if we talked about it when we were going through it here or not.
Are you disappointed, though, that he has not been more forceful on that issue? I mean, this is an issue you and talked about, you said you want to see his action.
You know, Ken, I have my opinion. As you know, I've stated my opinion clearly to the people of this state. I've taken the action I deem appropriate vis-a-vis the people of this state. I wouldn't presume to tell the President of the United States what his opinion should be or his politics or his strategy.
Do you think that the Vice President's comments on this provide a window toward the President's thinking on the topic?
I don't know, Eric. I don't know.
Do you plan to sign on to the campaign that's trying to get a plank at the Democratic Convention to support gay marriage?
You know, Nick, that's up to the DNC. I don't know that there is a campaign to sign on to or not. Obviously, I believe the actions of this state speak loudly, and I think the action we took is a forceful action nationwide. I think a lot of the increase in this dialogue may very well be in part because of the action this state took. So I think the influence of New York is being felt, but it's up to the DNC.
Governor, do you think that you said that you'd be willing to campaign for the president potentially out of state? Do you think that your stance on this issue makes you perhaps a challenge, or does it depend on the state where you might send you?
You know, Casey, I said that I would be helpful to the president however they deem appropriate. I don't know what calculus they wind up with and what they deem appropriate. Would I be shocked if they said, you know, help with New York and that's where you're best? You know, I wouldn't be shocked at anything. So I'll just leave that to them. I'm sure that's one of the factors that they'll calculate, but I'd leave it to them. And I don't know ultimately what their politics are going to be and where I can be helpful, where I'm not helpful.
Governor, have you considered, or have you, would it be in the realm of possibility for you to become vice president?
No, it would not be in the realm of possibility. Thanks.